Hi, I'm John Ryan. I'm the technical lead on the YTT tool within the Carvel team. I'm also responsible for this proposal on YTT validations. First off, I just want to thank you for taking the time to review this proposal. Our goal is to solve the right problem in the right way. Being able to get and fold in your perspective into our efforts increases our chances of doing just that. So thank you. So in this recording, I'm going to give you the background that you need to quickly jump into digesting and critiquing this proposal. So we'll start by validating the need for validations or motivating it by working through an example. We'll then show you that there's more needed than just writing assertions for a validation framework. We'll then turn to the proposal itself. It's rather detailed, so you don't want to have to read it all in order to provide useful feedback, and you won't have to. So I'll point you to the two key sections in the proposal that you should focus on first. I'll give you some prompts to make clear what would be instantly valuable feedback. And finally, I'll share with you two key mechanisms you can use to give us feedback. So let's jump in. The need for validations. In the beginning, we have YAML. In this example, we're going to start with the Kubernetes deployment manifest. And YTT will happily process this well-formed YAML. So next I want to start building a configuration API for my users. I do this by naming variables, which we call data values, and turning our plain YAML into a template by simply annotating it with some YTT. First, we name the variable in a data values file. And then we'll load up that data module into our now YTT template. And then we'll use that value anywhere we want in this template. And then when YTT processes this, we'll see that it's injecting a setting for instances for the value of replicas. Here it's 3, and now it's 1. Now, as someone using this template, I can then now set the data value for my own needs really easily. So this is just a simple example of templating. But what happens when someone using my template misunderstands, and instead of putting in the number 5, they put in the word 5? So I know it's a little contrived here, but we're just trying to illustrate a point. This won't work if we attempt to apply this to a cluster. So it's valuable to know that my input is of the right type, that is, that it's well formed. So in YTT, this is really easy. So instead of just naming a data value, we declare a variable of a specific type. So YTT is going to now infer the type from this default value. Here, an integer. So with this schema in place, if our user supplies a wrong typed value, now they're going to get a useful error message that points them in the right direction. Nice. Okay, so now imagine further that in your system, you know that if the user configures more than 4 instances of this deployment, it's actually going to lead to performance problems. Now, it's a rough way to learn to deploy with a larger value and discover that it's a problem. So what if instead you could put bumpers on those values? And that's the point of a validation, to ensure that the inputs are not just well formed, but they're also within tolerances. So you can roll your own validation and it would look something like this. So we just have a plain Starlark file here. YTT will automatically load and evaluate any such file. So in our case, we can rely on that to create the side effect that our data value is going to be validated. It's a simple conditional. We make sure our error message is succinct, informative, and actionable. So now when we attempt to instantiate with 5 replicas, our mistake is caught at templating time, not when we observe performance problems in production. So if there's already a way to write validations, then why this proposal? So it turns out writing the validation is the most meaningful part. They're not so obvious needs that quickly arise. What happens if there's more than one data value that's invalid? With a simple approach, we'd learn about the violations one at a time. This can be frustrating. So one feature of a framework is that it would collect all of the violations and report them together. And that's bookkeeping you shouldn't have to do. Also, it doesn't take long to start noticing repeated flavors of validation. In our example, we're checking to see if a value is less than some maximum or greater than some minimum. That's likely to be a very common case. But right now, I'm repeating myself. But that's code you shouldn't have to write. Instead, you should be able to just declare the rules and describe what a data value looks like, and the tool should do the rest. What would that look like? Let's take a peek at the proposal to see an example. Here we have two data values, namespace and username. Both are strings, both default to an empty string. We propose that what you ought to be able to do is declare that these values should be of some length of at least 1. That is, namespace and username should not be empty strings. So back in our example, instead of having to maintain this validations file, we can just delete this thing entirely and instead write a validation for each of these data values. Now we haven't implemented it, so these annotations won't be interpreted, but this illustrates all of what YTT would do. What will the validation features do? Well, there's 2 sections that you should read. The others are good detail, but these are the 2 most important ones. They define the problem we're solving. The first is the aptly named problem statement. We covered a little bit of this just now. So here you should ask yourself, are there parts of this problem statement that don't make sense? Are there any aspects that are missing here? The other important section is use cases. There's a list here of scenarios we're designing the feature around. Great feedback here would include identifying any use cases you'd expect to see but are not listed here. Also, you can pick a use case that piques your interest and ask yourself, in what ways does the proposed solution seem awkward? Or how might the solution be better? Now you might find yourself curious for more details. If you do, the most important section is the specification of the core annotation. This is exactly the annotation we added in our example to declare our validation. What the proposal is trying to say is that this annotation, schema validation, is a way to record the need for the resulting data value to have the actual validation attached to it. And that is, it's annotated with an assert validate. If we look at the definition of that annotation, here are all the gory details. You can name not just one, but as many rules as you like. Rules can either be a keyword argument, like the named rules, like we saw in our example. We can also specify what we call custom rules. Here, this is a pair of values. In Python or Starlark, this is called a tuple. The first element in this tuple is the description of what the valid value is. It's documentation. The second element is a reference to the function that is the actual assertion. We also see here a proposal for the violation message. We're showing that the schema validation ultimately results in an assert validate with the exact same rules. Now, this view of the proposal is really useful because it's rendered and it's easy to navigate around using the links. If you're not familiar, GitHub's Markdown viewer includes a navigation dropdown here, and the selection is automatically set to wherever you're at in the document right now. The best way to leave feedback is actually in the PR itself. You can see that others have already started reviewing and making comments. If you haven't seen this before, in GitHub, you just click the plus and you can even drag and highlight a chunk of text and just leave a comment right here. It's fine just to leave a single comment, or if you prefer, group them up in a review. We'll get notifications for each comment left, so your contribution is immediately noticed. If you have a more general comment, then you can just simply start a thread in our Kubernetes Slack. Thanks again for your time and attention. We look forward to hearing all your thoughts and ideas on how we can make this feature better. Cheers.